In Alaska, winter doesn't end. It lingers. The snow buries everything, except the sound of that explosion. For 10 long years, Jack Harlow has lived in silence, trying to forget the fire that took his brothers. But every morning, from the edge of the woods, a white husky appears, silent, unwavering, and stands before the hill that once burned red against the ice. A gust of wind lifts the ashes beneath the snow. The husky's breath fogs in the air, his gaze fixed on the scorched horizon. A faint, distant rumble echoes. Not thunder, but something deeper. The fire is gone, but something beneath the ice still breathes. If you find this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel and give us a heart to motivate us to make more touching videos. Let's continue the story together. The wind moved slow over Talkeetna's frozen lake, carrying the faint scent of pine and iron. Snow pressed down on the mountains like a shroud, and the world felt muted. No birds, no voices, only the creak of ice shifting beneath its weight. Inside a weathered cabin, Jack Harlow, a man of 45 with a square jaw, unshaven face, and eyes the color of worn steel, sat by a cold wood stove. His hands, rough and scarred from years of holding fire hoses, trembled slightly as he poured stale coffee into a metal cup. He wasn't old, not yet, but his shoulders sagged under memories that hadn't thawed. 10 winters alone had carved him into silence. The world outside had frozen, but the fire inside his head never stopped burning. He had once been a firefighter in the military, a man who ran toward flames when everyone else ran away. But since the explosion that killed 8 men in his unit, Jack had been running from them in his sleep. He could still smell the jet fuel, still hear Captain Ryan Keller's voice crackle through the radio before everything turned white. After that, he'd come north, far north, to the end of every road. Here, people didn't ask questions. Here, he could hide from the sound of his own guilt. Some nights, he dreamed of fire eating the horizon. On other nights, it was silence that consumed him, heavy, endless, almost holy. That morning, the silence broke. A shape emerged from the tree line. A husky, white as snow except for a faint streak of silver along its spine. The dog moved with the patience of something that had done this 1,000 times. It padded across the ice, stopped before the blackened hill beyond the cabin, and sat down facing it. No bark, no sound, just stillness. Jack set his cup down and watched through the frosted window. The animal's breath steamed in the air, forming tiny clouds that rose and vanished. He wondered whose it was, and why it came here every dawn like a pilgrim to a grave. When he stepped outside, the cold hit like a blade. The dog turned its head, one blue eye, one amber, and regarded him with unsettling calm. "You lost too, huh?" Jack muttered, voice hoarse from disuse. The husky didn't move. Beneath its thick fur, the muscles barely trembled. It looked old enough to have seen too much, young enough to keep waiting. Jack crouched, rubbing the back of his neck. His fingers itched with the old instinct to reach out, to command, but this wasn't a soldier or a stray. This was a sentinel. When he finally blinked, the dog had turned away, walking toward the burned hill, its paw prints vanishing in the drift. Jack stood there until the cold stung his lungs. He looked to the hill, scarred earth beneath thin snow, where once a depot had exploded and sky turned to fire. He thought of Ryan's face, the disbelief in his eyes before the blast took him. That look had followed Jack for 10 years, waiting at the edge of sleep. Now, seeing the husky standing guard, he felt something shift. Maybe the dog wasn't guarding the dead. Maybe it was waiting for the living to come back. The wind had calmed by afternoon, leaving the world glazed in white silence. Jack followed the frozen trail toward the charred hill, each step sinking with a soft crunch. The snow muffled everything, but he could still feel the echo of what had once happened here. The fire that had split the sky open and taken his brothers with it. He reached the blackened clearing where the fuel depot had stood, now just a ring of twisted metal and frost-bitten earth. Kneeling, he brushed the snow away with his gloved hand. Beneath the crusted ice, something glinted. A small, corroded rectangle of metal, the remains of a military name tag. He wiped the soot away and read the engraving. R. Keller. The name hit him like a hammer. For a long while he could only stare, his breath forming clouds that trembled in the cold. Jack stood, looking toward the horizon, and for a moment he thought he saw movement. A faint shimmer, as though heat were rising from the frozen ground. But there was no heat here, only ghosts. He slid the tag into his coat pocket and turned back toward the cabin. The snow was deeper now, pushing against his boots, and the world seemed to close in on him. By the time he reached the porch, his fingers were numb and his thoughts were burning. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine smoke and cold iron. Jack fed logs into the old stove until the first flames began to breathe. The fire's glow reached across the small room, catching on the edges of the metal tag lying on the table. It flickered like an eye opening in the dark. He sat there for hours, staring at that name, feeling the old weight pressed down on his chest. The silence was thick enough to hear his heartbeat. When the fire popped, it sounded like gunfire. He closed his eyes and saw Ryan Keller again. The captain with a square jaw and kind eyes, always the first into the flames, always the last to leave. Ryan had been the one who told him, "Fear's just the echo of love, Jack. You only fear losing what you still care about." That line had carried him through wars, but not through the explosion that ended it all. Jack leaned forward, elbows on knees, and whispered to the empty room, "I didn't leave you. I just couldn't face the fire again." Sleep came slow, like a tide dragging him under. The dream was vivid. He was back in the depot, smoke coiling like serpents, alarms screaming. Ryan stood at the center of it, unburned, untouched, his uniform glowing faintly. "You didn't leave me, Jack," the figure said through the flames. "You just haven't come back yet." The dream ended with a sound, low, rhythmic, familiar. A heartbeat, or maybe a poor step. He woke before dawn, the fire reduced to embers, the room faintly lit by the blue of snowlight. At the door, something moved. Frost lay curled against the threshold, his fur glistening with frost crystals, his chest rising and falling slowly. In his mouth was something metallic, a shard of blackened steel. Jack crouched, prying it free. It was part of a sensor assembly, melted and twisted. He recognized it instantly. A gas detector, standard military issue. The model had been recalled for faulty wiring a year before the explosion. Jack stared at it, realization tightening his throat. The fire that took his brothers might not have been an accident at all. By mid-morning, the clouds had thinned, letting strips of pale light fall over the snow. Jack trudged toward the frozen ridge where the signal towers once stood, the metal tag and the burnt sensor tucked in his coat. Frost walked beside him, his breath steaming like smoke. Halfway down the trail, movement caught Jack's eye. A flash of red in the white expanse. A figure stood near a snowmobile, bent over a device half buried in ice. She looked out of place against the wilderness. A woman in a heavy maroon parka, her hood lined with grey fur, her posture alert but weary. When she straightened, he saw a narrow face framed by chestnut hair escaping from under her hood, skin pale from the northern cold, and eyes a sharp, searching blue. "Nora Keller," she introduced herself when she noticed him, brushing snow from her gloves. Her voice carried both warmth and command, like someone used to being listened to but tired of fighting for it. She explained she was a meteorological researcher stationed in Anchorage, sent here to study methane irregularities from the old depot site. Jack said nothing, only nodded. "You live nearby?" she asked. "In the cabin by the lake," he replied simply. Her eyes widened slightly. She had clearly heard of the place. Then Frost barked once, running to her, pressing his head against her leg. She smiled faintly and crouched, scratching his neck. "You found a friend, huh?" she said softly. "He's mine, or he used to be. Ever since Ryan..." She stopped, her voice tightening. "Since Ryan died, he refuses to sleep indoors. He comes here every morning. It's like he's waiting for him." Jack's throat closed. He didn't expect Ryan's widow to appear in this wilderness, nor that she would be the one holding answers he wasn't ready to face. He tried to sound neutral. "You're Keller's wife." Nora nodded, her gaze distant. "Was. Ryan talked about this place before he—" She trailed off, forcing a breath. "I thought if I could finish what he started, mapping methane leaks, I might finally understand why it happened. The gas readings are spiking again, higher than normal. If something's shifting underground, another explosion could happen." Her fingers tapped against the sensor tablet strapped to her forearm. "But the main storage bunker's still sealed. I can't access it alone." Jack hesitated. He could feel the cold tightening around his ribs, the weight of what he hadn't told her pressing down. She thought he was just a recluse, another local, not the man who had stood beside her husband when the world caught fire. "You have military experience, don't you?" she asked suddenly. Her tone was calm, but certain. "The way you move, the way you look at the ground. You're not just some guy living off the grid." Jack forced a thin smile. "Used to work with logistics. Nothing special." Nora studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Because I need someone who knows how to read sealed structures. The bunker's below the South Ridge. Frozen shut for 10 years. She looked toward the horizon, where the Black Hill loomed like a scar. "Something's wrong down there, and I think Ryan knew it." Jack didn't answer. Frost stood between them, tail low, eyes flicking from the woman to the hill as though sensing the tension beneath the snow. Jack looked at the burned slope, then back at Nora. "If the readings are real," he said finally, "you shouldn't go there alone." Nora's expression softened, a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. "Then don't let me," she said quietly. The wind rose again, carrying the smell of iron and frost. Somewhere beneath the ice, the earth groaned like a buried heartbeat. The air on the ridge felt heavier that morning, charged with a strange static that made the snow whisper beneath their boots. Jack and Nora moved carefully along the frozen slope, Frost padding ahead, nose to the wind. The cold had sharpened the world into glass, every sound amplified. The creak of ice, the click of Nora's sensor scanner, the distant groan of shifting rock. Jack carried a rusted crowbar, prying at the frozen hatch of the old methane conduit, while Nora monitored the readings on her handheld device. Her breath fogged in rhythmic bursts, betraying both focus and fear. "Temperature spike," she muttered, frowning at the screen. "It shouldn't be rising this fast. It's like something's moving underneath." She crouched beside a fissure that had opened near the edge of the hill, her blue eyes wide with disbelief. "Jack, look." Beneath the transparent ice, faint blue flames shimmered like imprisoned ghosts. They danced in slow motion, flickering under layers of frozen methane. Jack crouched beside her, his face lit by the eerie glow. "It's venting," he said quietly. "Methane's trapped under pressure. If the seal breaks—" "It won't just be a leak," Nora interrupted, her voice trembling. "It'll be another explosion." Frost began to grow restless, pacing in wide circles, his fur bristling. The low whine of the detector became a shrill alarm. Nora's eyes darted over the screen, lines of red data flashing in warning. "It's heating from below," she gasped. "The ground's breathing." The ice shifted underfoot with a deep groan, and Frost let out a long, mournful howl that echoed through the valley. Jack grabbed Nora's arm. "We have to move, now." But Frost didn't follow. Instead, the husky darted toward the south ridge, his paws barely touching the snow. "Frost!" Nora shouted, but the wind swallowed her voice. Jack hesitated only a second before sprinting after the dog, his breath tearing through the cold air. The slope grew steeper, jagged ice giving way to gravel and ash. Frost disappeared behind a drift of black snow, and when Jack caught up, the dog stood perfectly still at the base of a metal vent half buried in frost. The pipe jutted out of the ground at an angle, old paint flaking away. But a faded red marking was still visible beneath the rust. Ryan's line. Jack froze. His pulse pounded in his ears. He brushed the snow off with his gloved hand, tracing the letters. The pipeline extended toward the valley, away from the storage site, leading toward the empty tundra. "He rerouted it," Jack whispered. "Ryan vented the gas away from the depot. To save us." The memory came in flashes. The final alarm, the order to retreat, Ryan's voice over the radio saying he'd stay to close the line. Jack had thought he never made it out. But now he understood. Ryan hadn't died from recklessness. He'd died sealing the final valve, keeping the rest of them alive. Nora arrived moments later, breathless, snow clinging to her lashes. "What is this place?" she asked. Jack stood up slowly, his throat tight. "Your husband's last command post." He looked toward the ridge, where Frost stood tall against the wind, watching the blue light flicker beneath the ice. The mountain seemed to sigh, releasing a faint gust of steam. It was not rage, it was relief. The world, for a moment, exhaled. The storm arrived before the sky had the decency to warn them. One moment the ridge was a world of still white. The next, it was chaos, wind tearing at the earth, snow twisting like smoke. Jack stood at the cabin window, his reflection swallowed by the flurry beyond. The radio hissed on the table beside him, the voice of Nora Keller breaking into static. "Station, roof compromised, pressure dropping," and then nothing but a shriek of interference. Jack's stomach turned cold. He grabbed his oxygen mask, heavy snow parka, and thermal gloves, his movements fast and precise like a soldier gearing up for deployment. Outside, Frost barked once, sharp and low, as if understanding before Jack even spoke. "Let's go, boy," he muttered. The storm howled its protest as they stepped into its open jaws. The world had no horizon, only motion. Ice stung his face like glass shards. Jack's boots crunched through the snowdrift as he fought the wind's invisible hands. Each step forward felt like pushing through memory, through fire and noise and loss. His flashlight beam sliced through the white void until it found the faint outline of the collapsed meteorological outpost. The roof had folded inward like paper, its steel beams twisted and dark. He could barely see the shape of the antenna mast bent against the wind. Frost's ears pricked forward. He whined, sniffing frantically at the buried door. "She's in there," Jack said, voice muffled through the mask. He dropped to his knees and began clawing away the ice. Nora was inside, trapped beneath the wreckage of her workstation. She was conscious, but fading fast, her breath shallow, eyes glazed with frostbite. The storm had turned her once lively face pale as the snow around her. Her auburn hair was tangled with ice, and blood streaked the corner of her lip. "Jack," she croaked, "you shouldn't have come." He ignored her, wrapping his arms under her shoulders and pulling. The air around them vibrated, low, deep, alive. Beneath their feet, the ground shuddered as if the mountain were exhaling. Jack turned his headlamp downward and froze. Through the fractured ice below, a faint orange glow pulsed, methane pockets igniting under pressure. The mountain wasn't just breathing now, it was burning. "Move!" he shouted, dragging Nora into the blizzard. The roar came a heartbeat later, a hollow, rising thunder. The fissure behind them split wide, light pouring out like the mouth of hell. Frost barked a warning and lunged forward, his fur haloed in stormlight. The blast hit them before Jack could reach cover, a burst of fire and snow and impossible heat. Frost leapt between them and the flame, his body absorbing the impact. Jack saw him engulfed in orange, heard Nora scream, and then the world fractured. The ice gave way under their feet, a frozen crust collapsing into the hollow below. The fire chased them down, but water followed faster, the thaw from the blast creating a plunge of icy flood that swallowed them whole. Then came darkness, broken only by the hiss of steam and the fading echo of Frost's final howl. When Jack's eyes opened again, he was lying on smooth glass-like ice, his breath visible in faint clouds. The air below was still, silent, heavy with melted snow vapor. Nora lay beside him, coughing weakly, alive. Frost was sprawled near the edge, smoke rising faintly from his singed fur, but his chest moved, slow and steady. The mountain had taken its breath, but spared them. Jack pulled Nora close and whispered hoarsely, "He saved us." She looked at the dog, tears freezing on her cheeks. Outside, above the cracked ceiling of ice, faint orange light flickered, the last sigh of the fire beneath the mountain. Jack woke to silence, dense, breathless, almost holy. The world around him was white and glassy, a cathedral of frozen walls shimmering faintly under a thin veil of sunlight that filtered through cracks in the ice above. His body ached with every heartbeat. He tried to move, but pain lanced through his ribs. Frost lay beside him, unmoving, his once silver fur scorched black along one side. Wisps of steam rose from the dog's flank, and each shallow rise of his chest was a fragile miracle. Nora stirred a few feet away, her parka torn, her face pale but alive. The oxygen from her portable air tank had pooled inside a small pocket of air around them. One last mercy of design or divine chance. She blinked at Jack, her voice barely audible. "We're alive?" He nodded weakly, the frost from his breath scattering like dust. The air was thinning. Jack's lungs screamed with each breath, and the edges of his vision began to darken. He looked up at the cracks above them, faint light breaking through in trembling lines. "We need a way out," he said hoarsely. His hands, raw and bloodied, pressed against the ice ceiling. He pounded once, twice. Nothing. Then he found a fissure, a weak spot glowing faintly from sunlight above. He unhooked his climbing axe, wedged it into the split, and struck. The sound rang like a bell in a frozen church. Shards of ice splintered down, cutting his knuckles, staining the snow red. Nora tried to help, but her arm faltered. Her wrist was still broken from before. "Save your strength," Jack said, his voice softer now. He didn't look back at Frost. He couldn't bear to. He just kept striking, until his breath came ragged and the blood on his gloves froze stiff. A faint rumble answered him. At first, he thought it was the ice settling. But then he heard it again, distant but rhythmic. Helicopter blades. He looked to Nora, who was already pressing the beacon switch on her transmitter. The light blinked weakly. Red, then green, then dead. "Signal's too weak," she whispered. "They'll never find us in this light." Jack turned toward Frost. The dog's eyes were open now, dim but aware, fixed on the sliver of light above. He groaned softly, struggling to lift himself. "Easy, buddy," Jack murmured, reaching to steady him. But Frost refused to lie still. With the stubborn strength of the dying, he dragged himself forward, claws scraping against the ice, inch by inch toward the light. "What are you doing?" Jack gasped. Frost reached the thinnest layer of ice and collapsed, chest heaving. His body pressed against the translucent surface, his pale fur catching the faint sunlight. And then something extraordinary. The ice, warmed by his burned body and thinned by Jack's blows, began to melt. A shaft of light pierced through, flooding the hollow chamber in gold. Jack shielded his eyes. Through that beam, he saw the rescue team's ropes descend, faint voices echoing. He tried to rise, but his knees buckled. The last thing he felt was weight, a gentle, familiar one, as Frost's head rested against his chest, eyes finally closing. The dog's heartbeat slowed, then stopped. When the rescuers pulled them out, they found Jack unconscious, Nora clinging to him, and Frost lying still across his chest. The sunlight refracted through the thin sheet of ice above them, forming a perfect cross of golden light across Jack's body. None of the rescuers spoke. One, a young paramedic with tear-lined eyes, made the sign of the cross. For a moment, under that fractured light, it looked as though the mountain itself was offering absolution. 6 months later, spring crept shyly across the Alaskan ridges. The snow no longer roared. It sighed, melting into slow rivers that whispered through the stones. Where the old outpost once lay shattered, a new structure stood, taller, steadier, painted the color of sunrise. Its metal sign gleamed under the pale sun. Ryan Keller Memorial Station. The building's windows glowed with soft golden light, and the hum of machinery replaced the silence that once haunted the valley. Inside, Nora Keller, her red hair now shorter and streaked with pale gold, moved with quiet authority. The months had reshaped her grief into purpose. Her voice, once tremulous, carried calm conviction as she coordinated data on methane sensors, safety valves, and wind directions. The woman who once searched for answers was now the one ensuring others would never suffer what her husband had. Jack Harlow lived on the edge of the property, in a smaller structure built from reclaimed timber and steel. He was the station's safety engineer, officially. Unofficially, he was the light keeper. Every dusk, he climbed the ridge overlooking the frozen lake, where an old signal lamp had been reassembled. The lamp's housing was forged from the remains of Ryan's scorched helmet glass, its interior cleaned and polished until it mirrored the firelight within. When Jack lit it, the flame shimmered through the lens like a living heart. He would watch it a moment longer than necessary, his gloved hand steady despite the ache that never truly left. The doctors said his lungs bore scar tissue from the explosion, but he never complained. He had made peace with breathing through pain. It reminded him he was still alive. Below the hill, a small fenced plot overlooked the thawing lake. Frost's grave rested there, marked by a simple metal sculpture Jack had forged from the burnt methane sensor, the very one the dog had carried from the ruins. The sculpture, a curled husky in watchful repose, caught the light of the station's beacon every night. When the wind blew through its hollow frame, it sang a faint metallic hum, like the soft echo of a bark across eternity. Sometimes Nora would bring wildflowers and tuck them into the snow around it, whispering thanks that never reached words. As twilight deepened, the station lights flickered on, and Nora climbed the ridge to join Jack. She carried a small lantern and set it beside his. For a while, they stood in silence, the kind that no longer felt empty but sacred. The flames danced side by side, hers enclosed in a modern windproof lantern, his in the weathered glass of Ryan's old visor. Jack placed a small brass plate beside the lamp, its letters carved with care. He guarded us until dawn. The words glowed faintly in the firelight. Nora looked at it for a long time, her eyes reflecting the flicker. "Fire remembers who we were," she murmured. Jack's reply came quiet, steady. "And maybe now it remembers who we became." Far below, the wind swept across Frost's resting place, carrying embers down toward the lake. The surface, half ice, half mirror, caught the shimmer of the twin flames above, reflecting them as two watchful eyes in the dark, one of a man, one of a dog. As the night deepened, the station light burned steady, small but defiant against the infinite white. It was no longer a flame of war or loss, but of life, the kind that guards until morning. Sometimes, God's miracles don't roar like thunder. They whisper beneath the noise of our days. Jack thought fire only destroyed, but through one loyal soul and a moment of mercy, he learned that even beneath the coldest ice, his light still burns. Maybe that's true for all of us. When life feels frozen, when the world seems quiet, God is still there, breathing warmth into what we thought was lost. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe again. Leave us a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more true stories of courage, faith, and the unseen hands that guide us home. May God bless you, and may His fire keep your heart alive through every winter.